At the time of this recording, we have just found out that the AP Computer Science A exam, the AP exam, is going to be run a little bit differently than it has been in the past. And so in this video, I'd like to cover a little bit about that and then take a look at one of the free response questions that is going to be similar to what you're going to see on the AP exam. And I will also do another video on the other free response questions. So let's just first cover the difference between the exam this year and in previous years. And I am recording this in 2020, and because of the COVID outbreak, the exams are going to be done a little bit differently this year. So the first thing that we have to understand is that in this year's exam, you will not have any multiple choice questions. You're only going to have 2 free response questions. That's as opposed to 4 that we used to have in the past. And you're going to be doing them separately. So you can see here, this is a page that the College Board has put out on the updates to the exam. And you can see here under the exam timing that students are going to have about 25 minutes to respond to question 1. And then 5 minutes to upload their response. You're going to have about 15 minutes to read and respond to question 2 with an additional 5 minutes to upload the response to question 2. Now the amount of time that you're given here is pretty consistent with what you would normally have had in the past. So the 25 plus the 15 minutes is about 40 minutes, and the 2 additional 5 minutes gives you about 50 minutes. And you used to have to do 4 free response questions in about an hour and a half. So you had about 22 and a half minutes to answer each question. So this is fairly consistent. The only difference here is you do have some time structure applied to very specific questions. So you have 25 minutes for one question, then you have to finish and upload it, then you have 15 minutes for another question, and you have to have that finished and uploaded. Okay? So that's just important to understand. Now, the other thing that you're going to take a look at here is the percentage of the exam weight. Now, in the past, all 4 free response questions were worth the same amount. Each one was worth 9 points, and as they calculated your score, it was pretty much uniform in how they were applied to your overall score. In this particular case, it's a little different. So you can see here question 1, which you have more time for, is going to be 65% of your overall exam grade, whereas question 2 is only going to be about 35%. And so the key here is the longer one is going to be a little more weighty here. They also tell you a little bit more about the question name. Now this is going to be something that was new for the future. They started to dictate that you were going to have 4 questions and they were going to target specific things. In the past, we didn't necessarily know what was going to be targeted, although we had some really good guesses. In this particular case, question 1 is going to cover arrays or array lists, and in question 2, you're going to be dealing with some generic methods and control structures. All right, so it's important to understand those types of things. Now, if you head down here to the corresponding free response question, the FRQs, you can see here that question 1 is going to be in line with FRQ number 3, and that is given to you in the course and exam description booklet. All right, so the question 1 is going to be in line with free response question number 3. The second question is going to be in line with free response question number 1. And what we're going to do in this video is we're going to take a look at that exam booklet and free response question number 1. And in another video, I'm going to take a look at free response question 3, kind of walk you through what it is that you're doing there and kind of give you some tips on how to do these free response questions on the exams. Hopefully you can maximize the number of points that you are getting. Okay, so let's actually hop over to the exam description. I'll put a link to this in the description of this video so you can have it. And this booklet's really good to look through. It tells you pretty much everything you need to know about the content of the exam and does give you some sample questions. It does have multiple choice questions, which are not going to be a part of this year's exam. But they are also including 2 free response questions, and those are the ones that we want to take a look at. All right, so I'm going to hop down to page 206 because I know that's where it is. And so you can see here that I have section 2 free response. And so this is where we're going to spend some time. What we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this first free response question, and we're going to break it down. I'm going to show you the code that I or you could enter, and we're going to take a look at how you would want to break this down if you're looking for the most number of points out of your free response questions. Okay, and I think that's important for everyone. All right, so the first tip that I have for you is to make sure that you read these questions as well as you possibly can. Now, the College Board does provide you with past free response questions, and I would encourage you to actually look at those, because the more familiar you are with reading them, the less time you're going to spend during your actual exam. All right, and time is of the essence, so you want to make sure that you can read through those documents quickly. So you want to be used to the format. You may not be used to that format. So we're going to take some time and look through that here, but I would also recommend, again, that you look at some of those others. And I'll probably do some other videos on some of those other free response questions so you can become more and more familiar with them. All right, so the first thing is, it says this question involves the use of check digits, which can be used to help detect if an error has occurred when a number is entered or transmitted electronically. This is actually a system that's used in a lot of barcodes. An algorithm for computing a check digit based on the digits of a number is provided in Part A. So at the very beginning, you're going to be given a little bit of a description of what is to come. All right, what's the scenario that surrounds this code? And so what we can see here is this code is written around this concept of a check digit, and the check digit is something that's used to help detect errors. Okay, and then we can see here that we're going to continue down in Part A. So let's see what we have here. It says the check digit class is shown below. You will write two methods of the check digit class. And that's pretty typical of an AP free response question. You may have to write two methods, maybe one method. You might have to write the entire class, maybe three methods. That's usually it. Maybe 1, 2, 3 methods or an entire class or interface. Here we see public class check digit. So we are dealing with a class here. And then the first thing that we come across is a method called get check. And you can see here before we have some comments. We have some multi-line comments, and typically these are written in the format for Java docs. Now, they are not written in that format here, but you may see that on the AP exam, so you just want to be familiar with that. The first part of the comment typically tells you something about the method, gives you a little background, and it says here it returns the check digit for num as described in Part A. So num here is a parameter. Sometimes you'll see in the beginning somewhere in here @param, and that is going to just kind of isolate for you, identify for you the parameters that you're dealing with. So we're dealing with a parameter called num, and I can actually see that here in the parameter list. All right, so we're going to return the check digit for num as described in Part A, and we'll get to that. Precondition. Now, a precondition is a condition that must exist prior to the execution of this particular method. So this is kind of telling us what to expect beforehand. It says the number of digits in num is between 1 and 6 inclusive. So what that means is num is going to have a length of 1 to 6. It could be as low as 1, it could be as high as 6. Both ends are inclusive there. All right, and it does tell us that num is greater than or equal to 0. So here is the method public static int get check, and there's the parameter num, and you can see here by the comment that we're going to be implementing that in Part A. Now, one thing that I would recommend is when you see something like this to be implemented in Part A, don't jump to Part A and get started coding. All right, I know time is of the essence, but before you do that, you really want to check the rest of the documentation, because you may need part of that to continue on to this part, and you may need to implement some of those other things that you're going to read about inside your implementation of this particular method. All right, so let's continue on and continue reading. Here's another set of comments right before the method called isValid. So what does it say about that? It says it returns true if num with check digit, okay? Num with check digit is a parameter here. Okay, so it's going to return true if num with check digit is valid, or false otherwise, as described in Part B. So we're going to have to take a look at Part B and see the description there. It does have a precondition. The number of digits in num with check digit is between 2 and 7 inclusive. Okay, so apparently we were getting a number with a check digit. So in the first one, in get check, we were getting a num. The purpose of this method is to give us the check digit, returns the check digit, and in this method is valid. It's checking a number with the check digit. So that makes sense of the precondition. The precondition is that the number of digits in num with check digit is between 2 and 7 inclusive, which makes sense because the check digit is going to be one digit. And in order to get the check, I'm going to be dealing with a number that's between, or it has a length of between 1 and 6. So with the check digit, it's going to be a length of 2 to 7. All right, so that makes some sense. And we can see here that we are going to be implementing that in part B. All right, so in part A, we are going to be writing get check, and in part B, we are going to be writing is valid. All right, again, don't hop to part A or B just yet. Let's continue reading to see what else we have. Oftentimes, if you continue reading, you'll start to see some things that are going to be advantageous to you, things that you will be able to use in your implementation rather than having to reinvent the wheel. All right, so let's take a look. The next comment's pretty short. It says returns the number of digits in num. So here we have a method called get number of digits, and it is going to return to us the number of digits in this parameter. All right, so that's pretty helpful. If we needed to know the number of digits in something, we could use this method and it would give it to us rather than us trying to figure that out on our own. And you can see here it says implementation not shown. That's basically just to hide the code, basically telling you that you don't need to worry about it. It's going to work, but you don't need to worry about how the implementation works. Okay, that's kind of our description of abstractions. If you came across that term in computer science, abstractions, that's pretty much what this is. We can just use this abstraction, get number of digits, without having to worry about the inner workings of that method. All right, and then we have another method here called getDigit. It returns the nth digit of num. All right, it returns the nth digit of num. So if the parameter n is 1, it should return the first digit. If parameter n is 2, it should return the second digit. Precondition is that n is greater than or equal to 1, so it's got to be no less than 1, and it's got to be less than or equal to the number of digits in num. So that's a precondition. That is what is expected before this method is called. And so you can see here what it does is it accepts a num. This is the first parameter, int num, and it expects another int n. So if I wanted to know the first digit in a number, I would pass along the number and then comma 1. All right, and implementation is not shown here as well, meaning that we don't need to worry about how it works. We can go ahead and use it. Last comment we see here is there may be instance variables, constructors, and methods not shown. So there could be other parts of this class that are there, but we don't have to worry about them. All right, so that's important to understand there. Okay, so this is a class, and these are static methods, which means that they are called through the class. All right, they're not associated with any instances, and we are going to go see what we need to implement. So part A says complete the get check method. Now, typically what you're going to see here in most of these questions is instructions on what to do, and then you're also going to see some examples. It's very, very important to look at the examples so that you kind of have a good idea as to what is going to happen. However, what I've seen a lot with my students is sometimes they look at the examples and they think that's the actual situation that they're dealing with. And you got to be careful about that. Just because they give us an example down here doesn't mean this is the exact situation that we are going to be dealing with. It's just an example. We have to write our code so that it would work for this example, another example, anything. All right, so just keep that in mind. Never hard code the examples into your solution because you're pretty much going to get it wrong. They're just examples. Okay, so let's take a look at part A. Complete the get check method, which computes the check digit for a number according to the following rules. So we are going to have to complete this method, which is supposed to compute the check digit, and they're going to tell us how that is done. All right, so what we need to do is we need to multiply the first digit by 7. Then we need to multiply the second digit, if one exists, by 6. Remember, there is at least one digit, and we don't know if there is a second digit. But if the first digit is going to be multiplied by 7. If there is a second, it's going to be multiplied by 6. The third digit is going to be multiplied by 5, and then so on. So what we see here is we're starting to multiply these digits by 7, then down to 6, then down to 5. So we're going to need to do some multiplication. It says the length of the method's int parameter is at most 6, and we saw that before in the precondition, that it has a length of between 1 and 6 inclusive. Therefore, the last digit of a 6-digit number will be multiplied by 2. All right, so we're going to be going down 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. That's the lowest one that we will get to. So that's what we're going to be doing there. Now, if it sounds like we're going to be looping, that's a good idea. We're going to be looping here. All right, so let's just keep that in mind. Then we're also going to add the products calculated in the previous step. So we have to multiply up here, and then we need to add these things together into some kind of a sum. And then what we need to do is extract the digit, which is the rightmost digit of the sum calculated in the previous step. So let's take a look at some examples here and see if we can make sense out of them. Here's example 1 where the num has the value 283415. So we're passing this value along to getCheck, or this value will be passed along to getCheck. All right, so according to the first bullet up here, we would multiply the first digit by 7. So the first digit here is 2. All right, first digit is 2. We're going to need to multiply that by 7. Now, the first thing I'm thinking here is, how do I actually extract that digit from this num? If I'm going to multiply the 7 by just the 2, then I'm going to need to be able to get that digit out of that number. So I'm going to have to do something about that. Now, question, and this is a question that you should always ask yourself, is there a method in the situation that will help me with that? Or do I have to write this code from scratch? All right, now it sounds to me like something that I saw before. So let's take a look at these methods here. GetCheck, no, that's not helpful. IsValid, no. Get number of digits, no. GetDigit, get the nth digit of num. Now that's going to be helpful here. GetDigit, right? Because I am looking to get the first digit of this number. So the first time through when I'm multiplying, I want to get the first digit out of this number. So this method here, getDigit, could be very, very helpful for me. All right. The next thing we're going to do is multiply the next digit by 6. So we're going down from 7 to 6, and this is the second digit. So we need to get the second digit. All right, so getDigit is going to be helpful there again. And then the next digit is 3, so we're going to multiply that by 5. The next digit is 4, we're going to multiply that by 4. Next one is 1, multiply that by 3. Last one is 5, we're going to multiply that by 2. All right, so that's all the multiplication, and then we need to add up all of those values. So 2 times 7 is 14, and all the way down to 5 times 2, which is 10, and we're going to add those, and we'll get 106. All right, so and that's adding all the products. Then it says extract the check digit, which is the rightmost digit of the sum calculated in the previous step. So the check digit here would be 6, because it is the rightmost digit of our sum, 106. Okay, and so that's why it says getCheck returns the integer value 6. All right, so that's one example. Let's just take a look at another example. So here, in this case, we have 2183. So we only have 4 numbers here. Again, the first one's going to be multiplied by 7. The second one's going to be multiplied by 6. The third by 5, 3 by 4. There's no other digits, so I'm not going to do any other multiplication. So we're going to add up all of those things, and we get 72. So if we're going to return the rightmost digit, the last digit, then we're going to return the 2. So we're going to have to take a look at how we can do that. Now, getDigit does return to us a digit, so we may be able to leverage that in our solution. Okay. Now it's also going to give us some information about the 2 helper methods. Get number of digits and getDigits have been provided, and these are some examples of what they do, just in case we were not sure before. Get number of digits, 283415, that was our example before. It returns the value 6. So if I needed to know the number of digits in this, I could get that using this method. GetDigit, as we looked at before, is going to do what we said it was going to do. It's going to get the nth digit. So 283415, if I want the first digit, that should give me 2. And then GetDigit 283415, 5 should give me the 5th digit, which is the 1 right here, 5th digit. All right, very good. All right, so now what we need to do is we need to provide the solution for that. All right, so that's what we're going to work on. We're not going to deal with is-valid in this particular video. We're just going to work on get check. All right, so I'm going to hop over here to a site called Repl.it, repl.it. And this is a site that I use with my coders this year. This is a nice little online platform that we can use to pound out some code, and it saves their projects in a browser. It doesn't allow us to do anything visual, but it does allow us to do most of what we need to do in our class. So I'm going to just use this. We're not going to be compiling at all. We're just using this to type things out. Now normally on your AP exam you have to write things out. In this particular case this year you're most likely going to need to type things out. So I'm going to type, plus my penmanship is hideous to begin with, so I'm just going to type here. All right, so we're going to be implementing get check. Now what I've done here in my Repl.it, just in case you're a little confused here, is this is just a project, a Java project that it gives me that I created. There's a main method here, it's just a test main method, and what I did was I added a file called check digit because it's class check digit that we are working with. And I basically copied all the code from the description and I put that in here. So here we see all the comments and all the methods, and so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type out my code here. Okay, so let's first talk about first things. What's the first thing that you're going to want to do? Now in any particular situation when you are writing methods on a free response question, the first thing you want to ask yourself is, are there any variables that I'm going to need? And if so, let's declare and initialize them right now, because in many cases that's going to get you points. Okay, so you really, it's important to have a global picture of what's going on here, but it's also very important to understand the nitty-gritty details of what you need. So you are going to need variables. So declare them and initialize them, even if you can't wrap your head around the entire process, which sometimes happens. You get to free response questions that are worded weirdly, or they're asking things and you're not really sure what's going on. That's okay. It's frustrating, but it's okay. Start with just some of the basics that you know you'll need. Try to pick out some of the things that you know are going to be necessary along the way. In this particular case, I know I'm going to need some variables. Now, the first thing I know I'm going to need is a sum. I'm going to have to add things up. So let's create a variable called sum. So I'm going to create an int sum, so I would write int sum, and we're going to initialize that. Should there be an initial value? Yes, the sum should always be initialized to 0. All right, if we're going to be adding things up, I'm going to initialize that to 0. Okay, so in most cases, you've just gotten yourself some points. Now, every free response question that I've ever seen is worth 9 points, and in many cases, this may be worth 1/2 point. All right, that may not seem like a lot, but if you keep adding these half points up and these little points, it does allow you to accumulate some points along the way. Okay, so that's important to understand. All right, now, what other variables am I going to need? Well, in this particular case, I know that I'm going to have to multiply, right? I'm going to have to start at 7 and go down 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So this multiplier I'm going to need. So I'm going to need some variable that holds onto the multiplier. So I'm going to create another variable, and I'm going to call it multiplier. And I know it's going to start with 7, so I'm just going to initialize it at 7. Okay, so that's good so far. Okay, now what do I need to do? I need to multiply each digit by the multiplier. All right, so each digit by the multiplier. So I need to start with the first digit, then the second, then the third, then the fourth, and I have to go until I've run out of numbers. So how am I going to know how long the number is? How do I know how long the number is? Well, I know I'm going to have to start with the first one, but I don't know how long the number is. Well, if we take a look at our helper methods, we see that we have a method called get number of digits. Okay, so what I could do is I could create another variable, int num of digits. And what I can do is I can call on that method get number of digits. So I'm going to type that out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass along the num. Okay, so num of digits is going to be the number of digits in this. Okay, now I'm going to need a loop. I'm going to need to loop through each of these digits and multiply it by the multiplier. Okay, so you have a couple different options of loops in Java. I'm going to use a for loop. That one is the most versatile for me. So I'm going to create a loop. Now the question is from where to where? How far do I go? Well, I'm going to use a loop variable that controls which digit that I'm dealing with. All right, so I'm going to create a variable called digit, and I'm going to start with 1. All right, so I want the variable to be representative of the digit, and I'm going to start that with 1. Okay, now in many cases you're used to using a for loop, maybe using the variable I and starting it out at 0. That's completely fine. You can do that. You just need to kind of adjust your thinking in this particular case. Now, how many digits do I want to go through? Well, I have this num of digits variable here, so I'm going to continue while digit is less than or equal to the num of digits. Okay, so I want to continue while the digit is less than or equal to the num of digits. Now, if I didn't want to create a variable for this, I certainly could have just used this method call right here. So I could just, instead of that, I could have just called that here, and that's completely fine. But if you like to store your values in variables and then use them later on, that's completely fine as well. I like to use the least number of variables as I possibly can, so I would probably prefer doing it this way, but a lot of my students, they have a difficulty thinking through it that way, so either way is fine. So I'll just leave it like that for now. And then, of course, digits is going to be incremented by 1 each time. So I'm going to use the post increment operator there. You can certainly say digits plus equals 1 if you like, but I like to use that post increment operator there. Okay, so what's going to happen inside my loop? What am I doing? All right. Now, by the way, the loop itself also is going to get you points. So even if you're not sure what is supposed to go inside the loop, it's important for you to create the loop itself, because that's going to get you points. And one of the things you really want to think through, especially on these free response questions, is the limits of the loop. You want to make sure that you're going from the very first spot to the very last spot without going out of bounds. Now, we're not dealing with an array or an array list, which has very specific bounds issues, but it's always an important thing to keep in mind. Whenever you're creating a loop, spend some time thinking about the first time through and the last time through. The first time through, I'm going to be dealing with the first digit, so I want to initialize my variable to begin with the first item, the first one. And then I want to consider my loop condition to make sure that the last time through, it's going to be the last thing I'm dealing with. Now, I want to go through while num of digits is the last one, or I want to go while digit is less than or equal to num digits. So if I have 6 digits, then I want digit to be 6 the last time. So I'm going to continue while digit is less than or equal to num of digits. Now, if I was dealing with an array or an array list and I'm dealing with indexes, I've got to be very careful because the last index is not the same as the length. All right, in this particular case, it is. The last digit is the same as the length. So that if the digit is of length 6, it has 6 digits, then the last digit is the 6th. So I'm safe here. All right, now let's continue on. So we need to multiply. So we're going to have to multiply a particular digit by the multiplier. Okay, now if you like variables, you just take this step by step, right? What we can do is we can create a variable and let's get the digit. All right, now I'm already using this digit variable here, so I got to use something else. All right, so I might say nth digit. All right, now let's grab the nth digit. How do I get the nth digit out of that num? Well, if you remember correctly, we have this method called getDigit that's going to help us with that. So all we have to do is we have to provide it with the number and then the digit. So we're going to start with getDigit, and we're going to pass along the value num. All right, that's the num. And then the nth digit that I want is actually digit, okay? The digit variable here in my loop is controlling which digit I'm looking for. Is it the first one, the second one, the third one? So I'm going to put digit in here. Okay, so the nth digit is going to be achieved or retrieved by getDigit. Okay, now the next thing I need to do is multiply this digit by a multiplier, by this multiplier here. So I'm going to create another variable called product, and I'm going to multiply those two. So nth digit times the multiplier. So the next thing I need to do is update the sum. So while I'm in the context of the loop, I want to make sure my sum gets updated, because if I wait until after the loop, okay, if you take a look here, it almost looks like the sum is done afterwards, right? After you're done multiplying all these things. But really, we're not going to be able to do that unless we hold on to those products for later on. And we're not doing that. So what we need to do is every time we get a product, let's put that into the sum. So we already have sum declared, so I'm just going to say sum, and then we're going to add to whatever that is with product. Okay. Now if you don't like that particular operator, you can use sum equals sum plus product. All right. And that's going to add the product into the sum. All right, so that seems like what we're supposed to do inside the loop. We're supposed to grab the nth digit, we're supposed to multiply by the multiplier, and then we should add that to our sum. Now, before we move on, we should really think about other iterations of this loop. This is the first time through, but what about the second time through? Is anything going to change? Did we anticipate every change? So we go back up here, digit becomes not 1 but 2 now. And now we're grabbing the second digit. That's going to be the nth digit. And now we need to multiply that by the multiplier. But the second time through, multiplier shouldn't be 7, it should be 6. So in the next iteration of the loop, multiplier needed to have changed. And at this point, I have not changed that. So I really, at the end of my loop, should be decrementing that by 1. So multiplier minus minus. Okay, and if you don't like that, you can use multiplier minus equals 1. You can also use multiplier equals multiplier minus 1. All right, that's a lot. So I like to just use the minus minus. Okay, so that's going to decrease multiplier by 1 each time. So the second time through, multiplier should be 6. All right, so that makes sense. And now, as long as I keep going, everything should be working out well. Okay, now if you're looking at this, you're a little bit more seasoned. You may look at this loop and say, you have a lot of unnecessary things in here. And you're absolutely right. You could really write this whole thing in one line. I'll just show you here. You could really do this all in one line. So really the only thing that needs to be assigned here is sum. So the thing that we need to deal with is sum. And what do we need to add to that? Well, we need to add to that the nth digit, which I can acquire by this method call right here. So rather than dealing with nth digit, the variable, I can just use what I used to get that variable, right? And then I can multiply it by multiplier. And we know that multiplier needs to decrease every single time through the loop. So I can use the post decrement operator right there. All right, so these 4 lines really could be summarized or consolidated into this line. All right, so sum we're going to add to that, get digit, num of digit times the multiplier. And what this does here is it uses whatever multiplier is at the present, and then after it's been evaluated, then it decrements this. Now, as I tell my students, if you're not comfortable with the post and pre decrement and increment operators, that you need to really be very careful with their use. Most of my students are very comfortable with this use where I'm using it just kind of on an open line. And that's completely fine. If you start adding it into another statement and you're really not sure of what's going on, you can really cause a lot of problems. So if you're not comfortable with this, this is completely fine up here. The AP exam readers are not going to say, oh, they didn't realize that they could consolidate all those 4 lines into one line, so we're going to take points off. That's not the way it works. They're going to add points to your score. Now, speaking of which, what are they going to want to do here? What are they going to want to see? Well, the first thing I already mentioned were the variables up here. The second thing is the loop. The next thing they're going to be looking for is, are you trying to access a digit? Are you attempting to do things? That's pretty much the way they work. Are you attempting to do this? Were you successful? Are you attempting to do this? Are you successful? Inside the loop, did you recognize you needed to be multiplying? Inside the loop, did you recognize you needed to get a digit? Inside the loop, did you recognize you needed to add that to the sum? They're going to be looking for all of those things. So as many of those things that you can think about ahead of time, just put them in there. Even if you're unsure of how it fits into the whole picture, you want to add that code in there to get as many points as you possibly can. Okay, now we are not done. We have the sum, and if we take a look back here at the example, what do we do when we have the sum? Well, we have to provide the check digit, which is the rightmost digit of our number. All right, so we have to somehow get the last digit of our number. Now we do have this helper method called getDigit, which will give us a digit of our number. All right, and so we could utilize that. There's a couple different ways we could do this. Now there's one really quick way that we could do this. Let me just show you that. We could just return sum, and the easiest way to get the last digit off an integer is just use some remainder division. So if you're comfortable with modular arithmetic or remainder division, you would recognize that if I just take sum and I grab the remainder of it divided by 10, that's going to give me the last digit. So for example, if I have 45 divided by 10, or remainder, or mod 10, really, that's going to equal 5. All right, so basically what we're doing here is taking 45, dividing it by 10, but only getting the remainder. All right, that's why this is called the remainder operator. All right, or this is called modulo or modulo, however you want to pronounce that, or mod. It's 45 mod 10. So we're taking 45, we're dividing it by 10, but we are just looking at the remainder. So 45 mod 10 is going to be 5. All right. Now, if you're not comfortable with that, there's another way we can go about this. All right, what we can do is we can leverage getDigit, because getDigit is designed to get us a digit of our number. All right, so what we may want to do is return getDigit, and what we're going to do is we're going to return whatever it gives us, and what we're looking for is a digit of sum. Okay, we want the last digits. The question is, how do we actually get the last one? We need to know what number it is. So if we have 3 digits, we need the third one. If we have 5 digits, we need the 5th one. How are we going to know which digit is the last one? Well, what we can do is we could also use get number of digits. Okay, so what we could do here is just say, hey, let's get number of digits, and we'll give it our variable, or our value sum. Okay, so we could do that. So what this is going to do is it's going to look at getDigit, and it's going to ask it to get a particular digit of sum. Now, which digit? Well, we want the last one. If there's 3, there's the third. If there's 4, we want the fourth. If there's 2, we want the second. So basically, we want the last one, or the number of the digits, okay? And so what we're going to do is we're going to get number of digits and pass along sum. Now, if you don't like that, if you'd like to break that down, you can certainly do that. You could say something like num of digits in sum. Now, I'm using very verbose variable descriptions here because I'm doing this for you. You could use something a lot shorter if you want, but I'm just trying to make sure you understand exactly what it is that I'm grabbing and storing in these variables. All right, so I could just say get number of digits and then sum, and then I could say int check, that's the check digit, equals get digit sum num of digits in sum, and then we could just return check digit. Okay, so if you're more comfortable with the variables, then you can do it that way, step by step. First thing we need to do is figure out how many digits there are in sum. So let's use get number of digits to figure that out. The next thing we need to do is we need to get the digit out of the sum. So let's use get digit to do that. Get digit sum, and then the number of digits in sum. That should get us that last digit, and then of course we need to return that. So again, you can do it like that, or you can return it in one statement. Okay, now the last piece I want to just mention here. This is an important part of your free response. When you are writing a method, you want to make sure that you're returning something. Okay, points are almost always going to be available for the return. So one of the things I recommend my students do is make sure they take a look here at what the method is supposed to do. Not only what it's supposed to produce, but what it's supposed to return. And make sure you get a return statement in there. Because a lot of times you will get a half point or a point just for remembering the return. You could have this entire thing messed up. But you could have your variable set up and you could have a return, and you could still end up getting maybe 1 or 2 out of 4 points or 5 points, depending on the situation. So you just want to make sure that you are looking at that thoroughly. All right, I hope that gives you a good overview of getCheck. What we're going to do in the next video is we're going to take a look at isValid.